Well, as you know, we are continuing with our sermon series that we call The Power of Words. And this week, I want to focus our attention on that passage of Scripture that Deb read for us from Corinthians. And as we look at this text, I hope that we will be able to relate quite well to some of the political rancor that causes many people to use some pretty awful words, use the power of words in some pretty awful ways to hurt one another, to bring pain and grief to many, and to make us all a little poorer, I think. We've been reflecting on two verses, I should say, and we gave you this memory card in week one. I hope many of you have it. If you don't have one, I don't know if the ushers are prepared right now to give you one, but we'll try to get you one. If not after worship, then we'll get one for you certainly by next week. But those of you who either have your card with you or have already memorized it, I invite you to join with me in reading or reciting the first verse, which is Ephesians 4:29. It's on the dark side of that card. Ephesians 4:29. It reads like this. Let us read together. Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only what is useful for building up as there is need, so that your words may give grace to those who hear. Amen. I think that this particular message can help us not only as we look at how we do politics in our community, but just in thinking about how it is that we can get along with each other in spite of differences. In spite of our differences. How to get along. Maybe we can learn how to get along with someone when we disagree with that person. That essentially was the trouble that was going on in the city of Corinth those many years ago. The people had broken down into a kind of factionalism. There was discord within the church. There was chaos in the Christian community because some of the people aligned themselves with the founder of their church, who happened to be Paul. So we know him as the Apostle Paul, St. Paul. Paul, the writer of the letter to the Corinthians, who had founded the church of Corinth some years ago. And now people were divided because they said, well, we really follow Paul. But some other folks said, no. We like the preacher that came after Paul. We like Apollos. And they say, no, we belong to Apollos. And that's the word they use. They said, I belong to Paul, or I belong to Apollos. And so there was this terrible dissension going on inside of the Christian church. And somehow it seems that the people, through this party spirit, had just kind of lost their way. They had lost sight of what their true belonging was, because they said that I belong to Paul and I belong to Apollos. But really, they should have been saying that we all belong to God. Anytime that we are in the Christian family, folks, we belong to God. We all belong to God. And there's no room for any partisanship. There's no room for any partisanship to any other human leader or group when we are following Jesus the Christ. Now, Paul and Apollos are quite different from each other in many ways, and yet they work together. They were different from each other because Paul was sort of a rough guy. He was the one who came in and got you shook up, and then he got you fired up and brought people from their pagan lifestyle into the church, into following Jesus Christ. But on the other hand, Apollos was a more refined, polished speaker. They didn't have any real difference in terms of the actual content of the message, but it was the way that their oratory came out. So Apollos was the guy who could connect the dots between all of the points of intellectual attachment to God and connect that with the everyday, ordinary behavior of being a Christian and what that meant. And he did it in a very smooth, analytical way. And that appealed to many people. We all have our favorites, don't we? Because everybody has their own way of learning, and sometimes you need one kind of a presentation, and another time another kind of presentation is just what the doctor ordered. But I want to point out something to you. Paul had this response to the situation that was developing there. He said in chapter 3, verse 5 of the same letter of 1 Corinthians, "What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth." So I want to read that. I want to stress that because I don't want any of you to get into a party mood around here. You see, I know that I'm just the latest in a long line of great pastors of Rosa United Methodist Church. Matter of fact, the other day, Kathy Smith, our secretary, was saying that, yeah, she had to confess when I came in. She said, okay, here's another one I got to train. Because she's seen them come and she's seen them go. And so it's clear to me that George Crisp and John Yoon and David Camphouse and Lee Cunningham and Sangman Shin were here before I was. Just like Paul was there before Apollos was. And in a real sense, I'm just trying to build on what some of them already planted here. There's no reason for me to be jealous because some of you are still fond of and have great memories of those fine pastors. Because there's no difference between me and George, except the size of our belts. But in a real sense, they were planting seeds, and I have come along to water. But like Paul says, really, it's not the one who plants the seeds or even the one who waters that's anything special. It's God. It's God who gives the growth. That's who we celebrate and praise. And so just like Paul, I have to turn to you, my people, and say, don't get caught up in the unimportant, petty stuff. Don't get a party spirit bickering between you, saying, oh, he's not part of my clique. We don't speak with him. He's not as educated as we are. Don't get a party spirit that says, oh, we don't talk to her because she's snobbish. And we just stick with ourselves because we like football and they don't. We get hung up in our little groups. We think that God cares about our group more than he cares about the other group. Please, folks, come on. Come on. You know, I have had to actually stand in the pulpit and tell people, God does not care whether the Dodgers win or the Cubs win. Sorry to break your heart, Janie. I'm a Dodger fan, by the way. But you know that some people lose their minds over sports. We had a case just a couple of years ago where a San Francisco Giant fan went to Dodger Stadium, was beaten within an inch of his life because he dared to wear some San Francisco Giants paraphernalia up into the stands at Dodger Stadium. That's why I'm preaching. Y'all think this isn't important. But we have party spirits breaking up the human family left and right. And we've got to do something about it. The Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats and the Republicans. They have some words for each other. And they aren't very nice. And the terrible part of it is, it's not just out in the world during the election season. And we're coming up on an election season right now. But have you noticed that same rancor, the same spirit of our party is better than your party seeps into the church? Let me get down a little lower with it and bring it down home. We have some labels that we use. We call some people liberals. We call some people conservatives because of our views on certain social or political issues. And that's not so bad, but it's what we attach to those labels. When we call people that, sometimes it sounds like you're just calling them a dirty name. God does not care. And you know what's foolish and silly and childish about the way we label each other, according to those political things? We feel like, because it's my party, I got to hate the other party. And because it's my candidate, everything the other candidate is saying got to be completely wrong. Now, that's silly. I may be the only person in America who thinks that we need to get rid of partisanship in politics altogether. Nobody is conservative all the time. Nobody is conservative on every single issue in life. There would never be any growth. There would never be any progress. Because you'd say, well, that's not old-fashioned enough. Some of you have to be very liberal about technology, although you may be conservative about other issues. And nobody is liberal all the time. Because if you're liberal all the time, that means you have no regard for the past, no regard for tradition. And that's simply not true. It's silly to hate each other and label each other and fight one another because of these foolish, silly labels. So there need to be any party spirits in the church. Not in Del Rosa. Not in Del Rosa. That's what was going on in the early church. That kind of silliness. And that's why Paul wrote to them. And he said, y'all acting like children. You're children, infants, immature. Grow up. Grow up. We just get so bitter with each other. We get so impatient with each other. Someone wrote me an anonymous letter here. Someone here wrote me an anonymous letter last week. And they said in the letter, well, they took exception to the fact that I had mentioned from this pulpit that I was concerned about the Ferguson, Missouri situation that was going on, about the killing of that young boy, Michael Brown. And I also wrote about it in the what's that? Drumbeat. Thank you. I wrote about it in the Drumbeat. And in the letter, this individual, one of his interesting comments, he says, referring to my mentioning the whole Ferguson, Missouri thing, he says, most church members do not want this and other issues brought up in church. Now, since I don't know who wrote it, I'm not violating anybody's confidence, am I? Most members do not want this and other issues brought up in church. Well, I know that many people are uncomfortable. No doubt many of you are uncomfortable with this sermon already because I've mentioned the forbidden words, Democrat and Republican. Ooh. I dared to talk about conservatives and Republicans and liberals. Ooh. But lest you think, and I know that people have this belief that the church is supposed to stay out of politics. I understand that. And I understand about the separation of church and state. I'm aware of that. But folks, life itself is politics. Life itself is religion. There is no way in heaven or earth that you can separate the two. Because God is concerned with everything that concerns us. Everything. Everything. There is no aspect of life, no aspect of your life that God is not concerned about and wants to help you with and wants to lead you through. And that includes our political relationships. And so I can't fail to bring up politics when the church itself is deeply immersed in politics. You know, every time some of you, not in this church, but in some churches, you know, people are competing for the leadership positions. In this church, we there's no competition. But there's even political struggle within churches. And why? Because some people want to be in a position where they can control things. They want to be in a position where they are the boss. They tell people what to do. Maybe they're filling some void in the rest of their lives. I don't know. But I know that some people come to church all about politics and all about the wrong thing because they're not coming about Jesus. How can I fail to bring it up when we practice politics in the church? One day, two of Jesus' disciples started thinking about how they could get ahead, and they came to Jesus and said, Lord, fix it so me and my brother can be on your right and your left side when you get into glory. Fix it so we can be a little bit higher than everybody else. And Jesus said, listen, we don't do politics in the church the way you do it in the world. You see, in the world, those who want to get in charge and be on top, they just want to oppress others. They want to have power and control over other people. But if you want to be great in the church, if you want to be great in God's sight, then you have to serve. You have to be a servant. That's how you be great. That's how you will be great. The one who wants to be the greatest has to be the least servant of all. That is, serve everybody. Well, let me try to go quickly now to my conclusion. I've gone too long talking about the negative stuff. Let me say something positive before I sit down. And forgive me for dwelling on the negative longer than I intended to. Paul goes on to say, after he describes the tensions that were going on in Corinth, he says to them, now I will show you a more excellent way. Let me show you, he says, a more excellent way. And then he proceeds to describe what love is. And he says that love is patient and kind. Love is not envious or boastful. Love is not always trying to get its own way. Love bears all things, believes all things. Love, he said, does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but it rejoices in the truth. You know, whenever some major political figure gets into some kind of scandal, anytime there's a hint, in fact, of a scandal, you can almost hear the cheering coming out from the other side. And there's a sense of, oh, we got him now. We got him. And that doesn't matter which side it's coming from. That's when you are rejoicing in the wrongdoing. Don't rejoice in wrongdoing. Be sad for people. It's not all about winning, friends. It's not all about winning. It's about finding the Lord. It's about making God real in your heart. So forget about winning. Stop rejoicing over wrongdoing. Rejoice in the truth. Not just any truth, God's truth. See, God's truth might have you telling on yourself sometimes when you've been bad. That's God's truth. Do we have any righteous people in the house this morning? Do we have any righteous people who are so right before God that they'll stand before their enemies and confess their own flaws? No way. We don't have anybody righteous like that. Or maybe we do. Well, we ought to love one another because we're family. And I want to just very quickly say one thing, and then I will be done. Proverbs 6:16-19 says, there are 6 things that the Lord hates. No, make that 7. That are an abomination to him. Haughty eyes, that is arrogance. 2, a lying tongue. 3, hands that shed innocent blood. 4, a heart that devises wicked plans. 5, feet that hurry to run to evil. 6, a lying witness who testifies falsely. And 7, one who sows discord in a family. We're a family, folks. We're a family. Let's love each other. Let's love each other no matter what our differences might be. No matter how different we might look from each other. No matter how differently we might even vote from one another. Let's love each other anyway. Just this week, they voted in Scotland about whether they should become an independent country from the UK, from the United Kingdom. And I just love one report I saw in which there was a mother and daughter who were on the opposite sides of that issue. The mother was voting no, and the daughter was voting yes for independence. And I loved it that they, in the piece, were holding arm in arm through the whole interview and just really expressing their opinions and smiling and loving each other. What an image. What an image. Why can't we be like that? None of this stuff is important anyway. Only God is important. Amen.